Welcome to the Standing in the Gaps News Deep Dive. As always, we're apolitical, just diving into the facts. Today we're exploring how U.S. policies might impact the Russian economy, especially with oil and the war in Ukraine.
And we're diving into this using an audio source called U.S. Just Cut Off Russia's Biggest Export Income Russian Economy Can Take This.
A very kitschy title.
It really digs into some interesting strategies, even going back to what a former president, Donald Trump, had to say.
All right, so this audio kicks off talking about Trump and his affinity for tariffs. He famously called them the most beautiful word.
That quote made headlines. It hints at how he views economic tools, like weapons to gain leverage in a negotiation.
Interesting. And it sounds like he sees oil prices kind of in the same way, especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine. The audio suggests Trump believes lowering oil prices could force Russia's hand in the conflict.
Trump called for OPEC Plus to lower prices, arguing it would cut into Russia's ability to finance the war and potentially lead to a quicker resolution. He even pointed to $45 a barrel as a sort of equilibrium point.
So that brings us to OPEC Plus, which the audio explains controls something like 40% of the world's oil supply. But getting them all on board with a plan like this is not exactly a walk in the park. They even mentioned OPEC Plus actually extending production cuts in December 2024, which would kind of do the opposite of what Trump's suggesting.
This highlights that OPEC Plus is a diverse group with its own politics and interests. It's not a single entity that just follows U.S. directives. A lot of these countries depend heavily on oil revenue, so a drastic price drop, even if it's aimed at pressuring Russia, could end up hurting their own economies.
Right, it's very complex.
Very much so.
Plus, there's the whole dynamic between Saudi Arabia and Russia within OPEC Plus. The audio mentioned that they have a history of cooperation, which makes this whole thing even more complicated.
Oh, absolutely. Saudi Arabia wants to maintain a stable oil market and good relationships with both the U.S. and Russia, so trying to force them to choose sides could backfire in a spectacular way.
Yeah, that would be messy. And then we have to think about Iran, too. The audio notes they're an OPEC member and a Russian ally. It seems like a lot of pieces would have to fall in place for this strategy to work.
It relies on a specific set of circumstances, and if we look at Russia's responses in the audio, they seem unconvinced.
They basically said this conflict is about national security, not oil prices. They're framing it as defending their interest, regardless of what happens to their economy.
And it's important to acknowledge Russia has its own narrative and motivations. Understanding their perspective, even if we don't agree, is crucial to analyzing the situation effectively.
It's all about understanding both sides. Even with the $60 per barrel price cap imposed by the U.S. and its allies, Russia has managed to keep oil revenue flowing. They found buyers like China and India who are happy to get those barrels at a discount.
This highlights the limitations of sanctions as a foreign policy tool. When there's demand and a willingness to work around restrictions, it's difficult to shut down a major exporter like Russia.
Controlling oil prices to influence the conflict might not be the best path forward. The audio then shifts to the Biden administration's approach, which seems to be focused on a whole lot of sanctions, targeting different parts of Russia's oil industry, producers, insurers, even tankers.
Right. What's striking is the sheer scale of these sanctions. The audio mentions a ban on 183 oil tankers, a significant portion of Russia's ability to transport oil.
But enforcing these sanctions is a whole other challenge. It seems like there are always ways to circumvent these restrictions in a global market like we have today.
Are sanctions truly effective if they can't be consistently enforced?
If there are workarounds, what's the point?
Exactly.
The audio also brought up something called secondary sanctions, which could target Russia's customers like India and China, which seems like it would up the ante.
It certainly would. But you have to think about the bigger picture. Pushing countries like India and China to comply with sanctions could strain those relationships and disrupt global trade. There's a lot of risk involved.
Yeah, you got to choose your battles.
Right.
So it sounds like the Biden administration is trying to walk a fine line here. The audio described it as a carrot and stick strategy, applying pressure while leaving room for negotiation.
It's the classic diplomatic dance. The question is, will it work in this scenario? Only time will tell.
Only time will tell.
Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of our deep dive, where we'll continue to explore this complex interplay of policies, economies, and global conflict.
Yes, we'll be right back.
Do you believe in standing strong for what's right? Do you value faith, freedom, and biblical truth in today's ever-changing world? Then we've got something special for you. Welcome to the Standing in the Gaps merch store, the official store of the Standing in the Gaps podcast, where we explore the social, economic, and political issues of today through a biblical lens. Here's what we've got for you. T-shirts that help you make a bold statement everywhere you go. Whether you're standing up for truth or sparking conversations, our shirts reflect the spirit of standing in the gap. Need fuel for those long, thoughtful mornings or deep dive discussions? We've got premium coffee, roasted to perfection, along with sturdy mugs designed to hold that truth-fueled brew. Want to represent your values wherever life takes you? Grab one of our stylish hats to keep you covered, literally and figuratively. And don't miss our inspirational prints that you can frame and hang up at home or in your office. A daily reminder to stand firm in faith. But that's not all. From accessories to gifts, we've got a variety of items that let you stand out while standing strong for what you believe in. Every purchase supports the mission of Standing in the Gaps, helping us continue bringing you insightful content, meaningful conversations, and the courage to face the tough topics. So what are you waiting for? Visit Standing in the Gaps merch store today. Link is in the description. Grab some gear, enjoy some great coffee, and help us keep bridging the gap in today's world. Together, let's stand for truth. Together, let's stand in the gap.
Welcome back to the Standing in the Gaps News Deep Dive.
We've been talking about oil and how it plays into this whole Russia-Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
But the audio we're going through takes a turn. It starts talking about how the U.S. might benefit from all this.
It's kind of this paradoxical outcome. By pushing Europe away from relying on Russian energy, the U.S. has stepped in to fill that void, especially with LNG, liquefied natural gas. Over half of U.S. LNG exports now go to Europe.
That's a huge change. This advantage might not last. Europe could go back to buying energy from Russia if things change. So the U.S. has to stay on top.
If Trump were in office, he might push for stronger sanctions on Russian energy, not just to punish Russia, but to kind of cement the U.S.'s dominance in the global energy market.
Bold move. But here's where it gets interesting. Russia's actually financing this war. And it's not just through their regular budget. They've got this whole secret off-budget scheme. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, this is where the economics gets interesting. The audio talks about a system where the Russian government can basically force banks to give loans to certain businesses that are supporting the war, like the hidden war chest outside the normal budget.
And the numbers are crazy. Since mid-2022, corporate debt in Russia has jumped 71%.
They link that to off-budget financing.
Russia's willing to keep this war going,
even if it means putting their own economy at risk.
And it sounds like it is putting their economy at risk. The audio mentions a bunch of potential bad stuff, inflation, crazy interest rates, even the chance of a credit crisis down the road.
Yeah, it's classic short-term gain, long-term pain by pumping money into the war. Through this weird financing system, Russia's creating a lot of instability in their financial system.
The Bank of Russia is getting nervous about all of this.
Makes sense.
They're the ones who got to keep the whole economy afloat. This kind of spending plus sanctions seems like a recipe for disaster. So where does Trump fit into this?
The audio argues Trump might use these financial weaknesses to his advantage, like tightening sanctions to cut off Russia's money flow and gain more power in negotiations about Ukraine.
It's a risky move. The audio makes it clear there's a lot going on. Global energy markets, international relations. It's we're on the edge of economic warfare.
It shows how impactful these economic policies can be.
It's easy to forget how it affects people's lives.
It's a reminder to stay informed and engage with these issues.
Absolutely. That's what we're about here at the Standing in the Gaps News Deep Dive. Thanks for sticking with us on this journey.
And hey, if you're enjoying this deep dive, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below. We'd love to hear from you. And speaking of keeping the conversation going, we wanted to take a moment to talk about our GoFundMe campaign for the Standing in the Gaps podcast.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to upgrade our equipment, get better webcams, studio microphones, all that good stuff. It would make a huge difference in the quality of the show and help us reach even more people with our apolitical news analysis.
Every little bit helps. So if you're feeling generous and want to support what we do, check out the link in the show notes.
We appreciate any support.
We'll be right back with the last part of our deep dive into U.S. policies, the Russian economy, and the war in Ukraine.
Have you ever dreamed of starting your very own podcast, but you don't know anything about computers? Sharing your story, your passion, and your voice with the world? Well, look no further. At Standing in Your Podcast, we're here to make that dream a reality. From helping you set up professional-grade equipment to guiding you through recording, editing, and distributing your podcast. Or if you don't want to do anything but talk, we've got you covered every step of the way. It doesn't matter if you're a complete beginner or ready to take your show to the next level. Our team is here to bridge the gap between your ideas and your audience. Plus, we'll get your podcast out to all the major platforms so your message can reach listeners everywhere. At Standing in Your Podcast, your voice matters, and we're here to amplify it. Visit standinginyourpodcast.com today to learn more and schedule your free consultation. The world is waiting to hear what you have to say. Let's make it happen together.
We are back for the final part, exploring how U.S. policies might be impacting the Russian economy, especially with the war in Ukraine.
Let's recap everything. We talked about Trump's ideas about using oil prices for leverage, the complexities of OPEC+, how Russia's responding, the Biden administration's sanctions, and even the possibility of the U.S. becoming like a major player in the global energy market.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. It's almost like a test match, except the pieces are oil and sanctions, and the whole world's watching.
And right at the heart of it all is this secret financing scheme that Russia's using to pay for the war?
Which, as we discussed, is causing issues for the Russian economy. Inflation, rising interest rates, the possibility of a credit crisis.
It's a risky strategy that could backfire.
What's the bottom line here for our listeners?
I think the main takeaway is that this whole situation with oil prices, sanctions, and geopolitics is complex. No easy answers or quick fixes. Things are changing constantly. There's a lot of different factors involved.
It really shows why it's so important to think critically and look at things from different angles. The world's not black and white, especially when we're talking about international relations and economic policy.
This deep dive highlights how interconnected all these issues are. It's not just about oil or sanctions or the war itself. It's about how they affect each other and create ripple effects across the global economy.
It makes you think, if Russia depends on hidden financing, could the U.S. and its allies target the specific sectors that are keeping it going?
That's a really good question. And I'm sure that's something policymakers are thinking about right now.
Yeah. Would that be a better approach than broad oil sanctions?
It highlights how tricky it is to create effective sanctions, sanctions that achieve their goals without unintended consequences.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment and let's keep this conversation rolling.
Big thanks to everyone who's supported our Standing in the Gaps podcast GoFundMe campaign. Your contributions are helping us step up our production quality and reach a wider audience.
Thank you all for joining us for the Standing in the Gaps News Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking tough questions.